Hi, I'm Brother Bill. Welcome to this installment of The Essentials. This time we'll look at David. As Israel continued to falter when they were led by judges in their relationship with God, they asked Samuel the prophet to ask God to give them a king. They wanted a king to be like the other nations. Samuel told them they were rejecting, they already had a king, that God was their king, and trying to be like the world, it wasn't a good idea. God warned the people through the prophet Samuel that any king would build his kingdom from them. He's going to build palaces, he's going to have armies, he's going to have servants and more, and where do you think that's going to come from? Well, the people didn't listen, and they got Saul as their first king, and Saul did all that and worse, and led the people often to disaster. Saul often blamed the people, blamed his soldiers, sometimes he even blamed the prophet Samuel. And so God replaced him as king with David. David he described as a man after God's own heart, and as such, David's reign, he had plenty of his own mistakes and his own sins, to be sure, but David stayed devoted to God. The difference is, when David was confronted with his sin, he repented. I've sinned against the Lord. And he would make atonement, however, whatever God required. And that was the difference is, and when God disciplined David, he didn't object. He wasn't like Cain saying your punishment's too severe. He accepted God's verdict, God's discipline if necessary, and God's guidance. When David wanted to build a temple, God told him, no, you can't, but one of your sons will. God made a covenant with David that one of his descendants would be the Redeemer. It would come in David's lineage. And so, in all of this, you see David's descendants after him, they weren't always men of God, but David himself became the standard by which all the kings were measured. If you read through that history in the Bible, in Kings and Chronicles, it would talk about the kings of Judah. They would do right in his own eye, or he would do right in God's eyes, as his father David did. Or he did not do as his father David did, and so he would turn away from the Lord. They always used David as the standard because of David's devotion. David's devotion is well documented in the book of Psalms, many of which he wrote because he was devoted to God. And you get a look at the man's heart because of that. Along the way, Judah, of course, went in decline. The kingdom split into Israel and Judah. The northern 10 tribes called themselves the kingdom of Israel. Sometimes they were called Ephraim. And the 2 tribes south, Judah and Benjamin, became the kingdom of Judah. And to this day, that's why we call them Jews. It's short for Judah. They're not all from the tribe of Judah, but that's the way that's how the identity has been shaped, because they were devoted, they lasted longer than the northern kingdom. But God sent prophets to both kingdoms, trying to draw his people back into that covenant relationship. And the people usually rebelled. Sometimes their kings also rebelled with them, and they usually killed the prophets that God sent to them. As such, throughout the decline, God still showed faithfulness to his people along the way, and yet he sent prophets to warn them of a coming judgment that was first mentioned through Moses. Moses told the people, if you don't stay in this covenant relationship, then God will scatter you to the ends of the earth. But when you're scattered, if you'll repent, God will bring you back even from that. And that's exactly what happened. We'll get more into that in a later installment of The Essentials. But God continued in his covenant faithfulness because he wanted to gather his people back when they would return from him. But you see, the cycle of judges, if people think with the right government, we'll be there, it didn't work. They got a king, and they tended to follow their kings. If the king was wicked, people tended to reflect that in their own wicked behavior. And if the king was good, he had his work cut out for him, trying to draw Israel back into that. One notable king like that was Josiah. There's a rich heritage there, more than we can do here in what we're doing in The Essentials. But if you have any questions, feel free to email me, brobill@foranministries.org. Until then, thanks for watching.